The desert before dawn looked like an ocean of ink, black dunes rolling into black horizons, the whole world reduced to silence except for the whisper of sand shifting under cold night wind. Far beyond those dunes, though no one on the British side yet knew it, Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps was on the move, a long column of armour and supply trucks crawling with headlights covered, engines low, stirring faint glowing clouds behind them. The moon was thin, a dying sliver, but Rommel's men didn't need light. They had rehearsed night movement so many times that the desert felt like a second skin. But the British had something new tonight, something Rommel had not accounted for, something he would not even believe when he first heard it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant James Kincaid stood inside the cramped, dimly lit operations hut at RAF Station Barrow Sands, a lonely radar post carved into the central Libyan desert. The station had no official name worth remembering. In fact, half of Whitehall hadn't even been told it existed. On maps, it was a wrong coordinate scribbled over with someone's cigarette ash. Yet inside this barn-sized shack hummed the British Army's most secret experimental early warning radar, a prototype meant to detect low-flying aircraft, but, in theory, capable of finding other things. Kincaid wiped sweat from his forehead as the machinery crackled again, its cathode screens washing his face in pale green. He'd been staring at the blips for nearly an hour now, unsure if his exhaustion was turning dust storms into phantoms. He leaned closer, breath tense. "What is it this time?" asked Corporal Lyle Matthews behind him, trying to sound casual but tapping a pencil nervously against a clipboard. Kincaid didn't answer. He squinted into the circular glass. The blips were faint, rhythmic, too rhythmic. Dust storms didn't march in tight linear formations. He spoke at last. "Charlie, get the commander." "What? Why?" "I think I'm picking up movement." "At 0400? That's impossible. Nothing's out there." Kincaid didn't blink. "We're not alone." Charlie swallowed hard and hurried out. Kincaid leaned back, staring again. What he saw made no sense. Their radar had a tested range of barely 20 miles. 30, if the weather gods smiled. But these returns, these careful, ordered pulses, were coming from 40 miles out, and they were moving, advancing. It couldn't be British. The nearest friendly brigade was twice that distance away and asleep in its trenches. It couldn't be tribesmen, those blips represented steel, not horses. There was only one man in Africa who could move such a force with such precision at such a time, and if that man was coming toward them, the desert was about to burn. The door swung open with a bang. Captain Hugo Llewellyn, station commander, stormed inside, tying his belt and squinting as his eyes adjusted. "This better not be another false alarm," he grumbled. "You woke me from the first decent sleep I've had since—" He froze. Kincaid pointed. "There, sir. Look right there." Llewellyn stepped forward, leaned in, and the colour drained from his face. "Get me London," he whispered. "Right now." Far away from the British radar hut, the Afrika Korps rolled forward. The engines purred. Dust rose in saffron clouds behind them as the night breeze dragged the particles in long, elegant spirals. Inside his command vehicle, Rommel himself rode with a map spread across his knees, a small flashlight clipped above it. He drew a thin pencil line along an unmarked track, stopping every so often to adjust based on terrain contour. He felt alive. The desert at night always sharpened his senses. It reminded him of the old days in France, the energy of unexpected breakthroughs, the thrill of knowing his enemy slept while he advanced. This was his moment. Another sweep, another cut, another manoeuvre that would leave the British gasping in confusion when the sun lifted her burning crown above the dunes. General Bayerlein, seated beside him, peered at the map with admiration. "If the British don't know by now, they'll know at sunrise. We'll be in their flank before they have time to stand up." Rommel nodded softly. "Surprise, Fritz. Everything depends on surprise." Back at Barrow Sands, surprise had already evaporated. The radio crackled. Matthews held the headset so tight his knuckles whitened. Kincaid felt the air grow thin as Captain Llewellyn stood rigid, speaking into his microphone with a voice equal parts urgency and disbelief. "This is Barrow Sands. We have confirmed movement. Large-scale vehicular convoy. Approximately 40 miles northwest. Direction: south-southeast. Speed: constant. Column appears disciplined and—" He paused. He braced himself. It may be the Afrika Korps. There was dead air on the other end. Then London's voice, sharp as a knife. "Impossible. The radar cannot detect armour at 40 miles. Llewellyn stared at the green pulsing screen, jaw clenched. "I know that. But it is. Are you absolutely certain?" Kincaid and Matthews exchanged glances. This wasn't just a military report. This was a claim that could get all of them court-martialed for incompetence or locked away for leaking classified tech they barely understood themselves. Llewellyn breathed slowly. "Yes," confirmed. "Multiple operators, multiple passes. They're out there." Silence again. Then London's voice, colder, now more calculating. "We will alert 8th Army immediately. Continue to track. Report every 5 minutes. And Captain, do not lose them." The connection cut. Matthews exhaled shakily. "Bloody hell, they believed us." "No," Kincaid murmured. "They're scared we're right." As dawn approached, the radar returns grew stronger. The machinery, never tested under such strain, began to whine and hum. Kincaid adjusted dials frantically, trying to stop the image from ghosting, from shimmering with interference. Outside, the sky began to shift from black to indigo, a faint grey seam forming along the eastern horizon. Soon, the sun would climb. Soon, visibility would return. Soon, the truth would be undeniable. But the truth was already racing ahead of them directly toward Rommel. Word reached him not through radio intercept nor through spy, but through an Italian motorcycle courier who skidded up beside his half-track with urgent, dust-caked eyes. "General, message from Division HQ." Rommel raised an eyebrow. "At this hour?" The courier saluted, handing him a scrawled note. Rommel read it. His face tightened. "What is it, sir?" Bayerlein asked. Rommel read again, slower. "A British radar station claims to have spotted our entire column at 40 miles. Bayerlein blinked. "That's impossible." Rommel folded the note, almost methodically. "Yes, that's what I thought. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us." Now back to the story. He stared out across the desert. Dawn light shimmered faintly, bouncing over the dunes in soft, wavering bands. His instincts honed through years of war whispered that something was wrong. Something had shifted. Some hidden hand had lifted the British blindfold earlier than expected. He tapped the papier-thin map with a gloved finger. "If they truly saw us," he murmured, "then our advantage is slipping." Bayerlein frowned. "But with what radar? They have nothing that can." Rommel raised a hand. "The British are clever, always one gadget ahead." A slight smile. "And we Germans don't give them enough credit for improvisation." He thought for a long moment. Then he made a decision. "Signal the column. Slow to half speed. Maintain dispersion. No lights. No radios. I want us invisible. If the British believe they've seen us, let us confuse them. Make them doubt what they saw. And if they haven't seen us?" Rommel's eyes glinted. "Then we'll still arrive intact." The courier sped away. The Afrika Korps slowed, engines rumbling lower, dust clouds thinning. The desert seemed to absorb them again, as if trying to undo the very trace of their existence. But the radar at Barrow Sands saw their shift. Kincaid watched the blips change pattern, stretch, widen, scatter. "They're adjusting," he whispered. "They know. They must know." Llewellyn stood beside him, arms folded. "They're reacting, which means they believe we can see them." Matthews cleared his throat. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Yes. If Rommel thinks—" He's been spotted, won't he? I don't know. Get angry? Kincaid shot him a look. Angry? Mate? He's Rommel. He'll adapt. Llewellyn nodded. But we adapt faster. A messenger ran into the hut, panting. Captain, 8th Army Liaison is on the line again. They're asking for waypoints, headings, estimated time to contact. Llewellyn took a deep breath. We're about to change the course of this campaign with a machine that was never designed for this purpose. Kincaid checked the next sweep. The blips pulsed again, faint but steady. Then let's make history. The hours ticked by. The sun rose, turning the sky molten gold, then bitter white. Heat shimmered above the radar hut like a ghostly halo. Technicians moved in and out with equipment, worried the generator would fail under strain. The machinery groaned. Screens flickered. Kincaid and Matthews took turns wiping condensation from the inside of the instrument casings. Outside, the desert beyond the station remained empty. No dust trails, no engine echoes, nothing. Only the radar knew the truth. And then, 8th Army finally replied with a message that chilled every man present. Hold tracking. Counter-maneuver initiated. All units repositioning based on your data. Accuracy critical. Kincaid's hands shook slightly. If he made even one mistake, misread a blip, misjudged distance, misinterpreted scatter, they could send thousands of British soldiers directly into a trap. The weight pressed on him like a physical force. Rommel, meanwhile, sat atop his half-track, goggles around his neck, staring into the horizon. He felt uneasy. The movements of his men were perfect, disciplined, but something gnawed at him, something unseen. He could not shake the thought that British eyes were watching him somehow. A small Italian reconnaissance plane droned overhead, circling. It dipped low, wings tipping as if in salute, then climbed again. Rommel didn't salute back. He was busy listening to the silence. The desert was never silent. Not truly. Not during war. But now, it was. And silence meant the British were preparing something. He called for Bayerline again. We need to accelerate. I don't want to lose initiative. But first, send a small detachment forward, test the British line, see if they react too quickly. If they know too much too soon, we'll spot it. Bayerline nodded and barked orders. Minutes later, a small patrol of armoured cars peeled off and moved ahead in a spearpoint formation. Back at Barrow Sands, the radar showed them immediately. New contacts, Kincaid said, leaning in. Smaller group, faster, spearheading the flank. Looks like a probing force. Llewellyn's eyes widened. Rommel's testing us. Matthews exhaled. He's trying to see if we're watching him. Kincaid wiped sweat from his brow. And we are. Llewellyn turned to the messenger. Get this to 8th Army. Enemy probe advancing at high speed. Light, armour. Likely reconnaissance. Recommend intercept before contact with main line. The messenger ran. Rommel watched the patrol push ahead. He timed it. He observed the dust pattern. He waited. And then, faintly so faintly he almost doubted it, small black dots began appearing on the southern horizon. Tanks? No. Too small. Fast-moving. More like armoured cars. But British. Interesting. Bayerline raised binoculars. They're coming directly toward our patrol. Rommel nodded slowly. Too quickly. You think the British know exactly where we are? Rommel tilted his head, thinking deeply. It appears. They might. Bayerline frowned. But how, sir? At night? At 40 miles? Rommel's voice was quiet, almost amused. That, Fritz, is what I intend to find out. Far away, at the radar hut, the heat intensified. The desert baked the machinery. The generator coughed, sputtered, then roared again. Matthews slapped a vent open, and hot air blasted his face. Feels like the whole desert is trying to cook us, he muttered. Kincaid kept watching the screen. The blips wavered. His heart raced. No, 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 stay with me. The blips sharpened again. He exhaled. We've got them. Rommel peered through binoculars. seeing the clash of reconnaissance units beginning far off. Dust clouds collided. Gunfire flickered like match strikes in the glaring sun. He lowered the binoculars. "So," he murmured, "the British truly are reading our movements." He smiled faintly. "Well then, let's give them something worth reading." And he ordered the Afrika Korps to shift formation once more. Back at Barrow Sands, Kincaid saw it immediately. The column stretched again. Compressed, shifted, widened. It moved like a great metallic serpent adjusting to a predator's gaze. Kincaid whispered, "Sir, he's playing with us." Llewellyn nodded. "He knows we're watching." Matthews looked terrified. "What happens now?" The captain stared at the shifting green echoes and answered softly. "Now the real battle begins." The desert heat seemed to tighten around the radar hut like a fist. Even the shadows looked exhausted, as though the sun had burned their edges ragged. Inside, the tension felt thick enough to chew. Captain Llewellyn paced the narrow space, boots scraping the concrete floor with short, impatient strokes. Matthews scribbled on reports he barely understood. Kincaid stared at the screen so long he could no longer tell whether the ghostly green glow was part of the machine or part of him. Through the thick, electric hum of the equipment came a sharper vibration, a long, low tremor that made the hut's wooden walls shiver. "Artillery?" Matthews asked. Kincaid shook his head. "Too far." "Then what?" Kincaid pointed at the screen. "Them." Rommel's Afrika Korps was real now, no longer an abstract blip, no longer rumour or guesswork. The radar painted their movement like brushstrokes across a shifting canvas, armoured elements dispersing more widely, support units folding back, scout screens pushing forward. Everything Rommel did radiated confidence, even in shadowy electronic form. He moved like someone who understood the terrain perfectly, who trusted his instincts, who expected the enemy to stumble. And until today, the enemy usually had. But now the British were waiting, and they were adjusting faster than Rommel expected. 8th Army had been repositioning for an hour, guided entirely by the radar's flowing green whispers. Divisions that would have otherwise been caught asleep were now pivoting, shifting, forming a line of defence that hadn't existed when Rommel set his plan in motion. Yet, no matter how quickly the British moved, Rommel adapted, cutting across their calculations like a blade through cloth. Kincaid's screen flickered. A bright pulse appeared near the centre. "Sir, they've changed heading again." Llewellyn stopped pacing. "Show me." Kincaid tapped the screen gently, adjusting focus. "They're turning east, no more southeast now. He's avoiding the forward intercept." Matthews threw his pencil down. "How does he know?" Because everyone knew the truth. Rommel didn't need intel to sense danger. He felt battle the way a hawk felt, wind a subtle shift, a pattern, an instinct sharpened by thousands of hours of command. Llewellyn clenched his jaw. "Get this to HQ. Enemy altering axis again. Recommend realignment of forward armour." The messenger sprinted out, nearly slipping on the sand gathering around the doorway. Kincaid rubbed his temples. He had once imagined war as something grand, something full of clarity and heroism. But inside this hut, war felt like a series of breaths held too long, each one tight with the possibility of disaster. Every decision, every reading, every guess could ripple outward and change the fate of men he would never meet. Far across the desert, Rommel stepped down from his half-track, boots sinking into hot sand. He surveyed the terrain ahead. The sun blazed overhead, turning his visor into a molten glare. Heat waves shimmered so intensely that distant objects wavered like ghosts. He lifted binoculars. The British reconnaissance cars he had spotted earlier were gone, retreated too quickly to have been coincidence. Bayerline approached. "General, the latest reports from the patrol say British formations have shifted. They're moving far faster than we anticipated." Rommel lowered the binoculars slowly. "Then they've seen us after all." "But how, sir? Air reconnaissance? Agents? Signals?" Rommel shook his head. "No. None of that explains the timing." His voice grew thoughtful. "They changed position before our probe made contact. Before dawn. before any eyes could see us. He handed the binoculars back to Erwin, his gaze cool and razor-sharp. They were watching long before sunrise. Erwin swallowed. A new British device? Rommel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The British had always been innovators underfunded, often disorganized, but brilliant in their improvisations. They turned scraps into machines, accidents into strategies, failure into ingenuity. Rommel turned back toward his column. Signal the artillery to remain silent. No smoke, no flashes, nothing to reveal our position until I give the word. And the main advance? Angle wider. Make them guess. If they think they see us, let them chase shadows. The order went out. The Afrika Korps began to drift like shifting sand dunes, adjusting its formation into curved lines meant to distort British perception. Back in the radar hut, Kincaid saw it instantly. "Sir, they're scattering." Llewellyn didn't move. His eyes narrowed. Matthews frowned. "What does that mean?" Kincaid exhaled slowly. "It means Rommel is trying to vanish. But we can still see them, right?" Matthews asked, voice cracking. Kincaid hesitated. The radar was experimental. Its ability to pick up vehicles at all was a fluke born from atmospheric conditions and engineering guesswork. But scattering disrupted coherence. Harder to track, harder to confirm, harder to calculate. "We can see them," Kincaid said at last. "But if they spread out any more, we'll start losing resolution." Llewellyn closed his eyes briefly. "Then we must work faster than him." The radio crackled again, 8th Army Command coming through, the voice clipped and urgent. "Barrow Sands, your last report indicates further deviation. Confirm or correct. We are adjusting 3 divisions based on your data. Accuracy essential." Llewellyn took the microphone. "We confirm. But be advised. Enemy movement is becoming irregular. They may be attempting deception. We understand. Continue feeding exact bearings." Llewellyn hung up, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. Kincaid's screen flickered again. For a moment, the entire array ghosted, the lines rippling outward like water disturbed by a thrown stone. Matthews stepped back. "The generator?" Kincaid crouched beside the unit, tapping the casing. "It's overheating. Can you keep it alive?" Llewellyn asked. "I can try," Kincaid replied, grabbing a wrench and loosening a side panel, letting a blast of scalding air escape. It stung his face, but he leaned into it, adjusting coils, aligning transistors, tightening copper nodes until the screen stabilized again. The blips returned. Faint, but present. Llewellyn exhaled. "Good man." At that same moment, Rommel's men reached a ridge, overlooking a broad wadi dry, wide, shielded from view. The perfect place to disappear. Rommel looked at the natural formation and nodded. "Move the support vehicles inside. Tanks on the outer edge. Keep profiles low." Bayerlein's eyebrows raised. "You're hiding the column?" "No," Rommel said, eyes shining with oath. "Calculation. I'm giving the British 2 choices. Either they guess wrong, or they slow themselves trying to guess correctly." Rommel's plan was subtle, ingenious, dangerous. He was giving the British a dilemma. And dilemmas cost time. Inside the radar hut, Kincaid felt the first tremor of dread. The blips slowed, compressed. Some disappeared entirely. Others drifted, indistinct. Matthews leaned close. Is that them moving into cover?" Kincaid nodded. "They vanished into terrain." Llewellyn looked at the fading returns and understood what it meant. Rommel is daring us to guess. "And if we guess wrong?" Llewellyn didn't answer. Hours passed. The desert sun climbed higher, blazing white. The heat grew unbearable. Inside the hut, men stripped to undershirts, sweat running down their faces. Outside the hut, a courier arrived with a package, fresh orders from 8th Army Commander. Llewellyn tore it open. "Prepare to guide counter-strike operations. Full commitment authorized upon confirmation of enemy main body position." Matthews blinked. They're going to attack based on us? Llewellyn nodded grimly. Yes. Kincaid wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the flickering screen. They shouldn't. Matthews turned. Why not? Because Rommel wants us to. Kincaid stared at the radar carefully, studying the faint smudge of returns hidden in the wadi. The signal was too regular, too still, too deliberate. He swallowed. Sir, I think he's hiding only part of his force. Llewellyn's brow furrowed. Explain. This main cluster, it's too concentrated, too symmetrical. Rommel never keeps his entire column that tight. Are you saying this is a decoy? Matthews asked. Worse, it's bait. Llewellyn went silent. If Rommel wanted the British to attack, then somewhere, out beyond the fading radar range, the real hammer was moving his armoured fist, sweeping around to crush the counterstrike. Llewellyn reached for the radio, but before he could transmit, the radar pulsed sharply. A new blip, small at first, then growing, fast. Kincaid leaned forward, eyes wide. No, that's not possible. Matthews choked on his own words. What is that? Kincaid's voice cracked. That's the real force. It was enormous. A sweeping arc of armour growing larger by the second, Rommel had outflanked them by pushing half his tanks into a long semicircle, invisible to the radar until now, hidden behind dunes, moving in perfect silence. Llewellyn grabbed the microphone, shouting to 8th Army, Cancel attack! Cancel attack! Rommel is flanking, repeat, Rommel is flanking. His main force is east-northeast at... The radio cut off abruptly. Static. Kincaid froze. Sir. Llewellyn tapped the device. Static hissed like a snake. Atmospheric interference, Matthews whispered. No, Kincaid said, face pale. Signal jamming. They're jamming us. But the Germans don't have jamming equipment out here, Matthews protested. They don't need to jam everything, Kincaid said. Just us. Rommel had cut them off. Llewellyn grabbed his field kit. Matthews, get the backup transmitter. I'm trying, sir. Kincaid stared at the growing arc on the screen, watching Rommel's trap snap shut with terrible beauty, like a steel trap closing around an animal's leg. He whispered. He's going to crush them, and they won't even know they're walking into it. Meanwhile, across the desert, Rommel stood atop a dune, binoculars raised again. From here, he could see his hidden armoured wing curving like a scythe toward the unsuspecting British advance. Bayerlein rode up beside him. General, the formation is in position, awaiting your command. Rommel's eyes hardened. Let them come closer. Bayerlein nodded. And when they do? Rommel lowered the binoculars. Then we strike. In the radar hut, the backup transmitter sputtered to life. Matthews slammed the keys, trying to form letters through static, but the interference swallowed half the message. Kincaid tried switching bands, trying alternative frequencies, anything to punch a signal through. Llewellyn gripped the mic. 8th Army, do you read? Rommel is. The radio squealed sharply, then died again. Kincaid's screen ghosted. Matthews turned pale. We've lost them, sir. We can't warn them. For the first time that day, Llewellyn looked truly afraid. Kincaid steadied himself. We still have the radar. We can still track him. There has to be another way. But the truth sank like a stone inside all three men. They could see the disaster coming. They just couldn't stop it. Miles away, Rommel lifted his hand. Bayerlein gave the signal. The Afrika Korps surged forward like unleashed thunder, engines roaring to life in a coordinated wave of armour and steel. Rommel smiled faintly. Surprise, he whispered, and the desert erupted. The desert night settled over the coast like a heavy curtain, smothering the last orange traces of sunset beneath a rising wash of stars. A faint phosphorescent glow drifted along the Mediterranean's edge, stirred by a soft wind that carried the tang of salt and the memory of battles not yet fought. On the outskirts of the British forward radar station, the men were already shifting into nighttime routine, thinner voices, quieter movements, equipment humming with a strange, electric expectancy. Inside the operations hut, the radio valves glowed like small red suns, casting amber shadows across the wooden tables, and the paper charts pinned like fragile skins to the walls. Lieutenant Henry Sinclair stood beside one of the plotting boards, hands clasped behind his back, watching the new sweep of the radar trace pull across the screen like a ghost dragging a hem of green fire. Behind him, Corporal Madsen scribbled, coordinates, his pencil tapping a steady rhythm. "That's the third sweep, with the same consistency," he muttered. "Still showing mass movement. Columns. Wide formation. Any chance it's noise?" Sinclair asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir. Atmosphere's clean. No interference worth talking about. Whatever's out there is big, and it's moving toward us." Sinclair inhaled deeply. Big meant mechanized. Mechanized meant tracked. And tracked meant the one man every British officer in North Africa had been conditioned to fear like a force of nature, Rommel. The sweep pulsed again. The arcs on the plotting board crept west to east. Sinclair nodded. "All right, get the data to command immediately." Madsen saluted, snatched up the coded form, and darted outside. Sinclair lingered for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the ghostly shimmer on the radar's face. For weeks they'd heard rumours chatter about German troop regrouping, about fuel arriving from an unexpected supply run, about Rommel preparing a sudden breakout operation. But this was movement on a scale suggesting something more than a localised probe or small advance. It suggested Rommel's hand at work. And now, for the first time, the British could see the hand before it struck. He turned away from the console, unaware that this night would be remembered long after the war, spoken of in low voices by the men who had been there, whispered across military academies as the evening when the desert itself betrayed the desert fox. Far to the west, Rommel rode in the open cupola of his command half-track, his scarf snapping in the wind. The Afrika Korps engines growled behind him, a rolling iron storm stretching across the sands. His officers had argued for more cover of darkness or revised routes, but Rommel trusted in speed, stealth, and the vast emptiness of the desert night to shield them. The British were not supposed to know. Dust rose in pale plumes behind the lead units, trailing like ghost banners into the dark. Rommel scanned ahead with his field glasses, their lenses reflecting slivers of starlight. He saw nothing, only the deep horizon, flat and indistinct, broken here and there by dunes, still warm with the day's heat. He lowered the glasses. Something felt wrong, though he could not yet name it. Perhaps it was the lingering fatigue headaches that pulsed behind his temples, a constant reminder that even the desert had its way of wearing down the strongest men. Or perhaps it was an instinct born of years tracking battlefields. "Major Schmidt," he called. Schmidt climbed up beside him, clutching the railing. "Sir? Have reconnaissance planes reported anything unusual from the British lines today? Anything at all?" "Nothing significant, just scattered patrols, no large-scale movement." Rommel nodded, though unease still tightened his chest. "Keep eyes sharp. The British have grown cautious, too cautious. That usually means they're learning." Schmidt smiled faintly. "Or they're afraid." Rommel considered that for a long moment before replying. Fear can be calculated. Intelligence can be gathered. But knowledge is dangerous. He glanced toward the dark horizon, the one place knowledge could hide. If they find a way to see us before we strike, even once, the balance changes. He did not yet know that the balance already had. At British headquarters in Alexandria, the telegram burnt its way up the chain of command like a spark leaping from dry twig to dry twig. Within minutes, officers gathered around the large operations table, eyes glued to the new intelligence forms pinned over the battle map. General Ritchie leaned forward, knuckles whitening on the table edge. 40 miles, he said slowly. "You're sure about that? The radar spotted them from 40 miles? "Yes, sir," replied the signals officer. "Station reports clear returns columns, armoured vehicles, estimated speed consistent with mechanized advance. Bearing heading northeast." Montgomery, standing stiff and silent, tapped the map lightly with his pointer. Rommel's concentrating here, he said. Just where our analysts predicted weeks ago. Ritchie exhaled. I'm still amazed the radar could detect ground movement at that distance. It's a new setup, Montgomery said. Experimental. Most of the brass barely understands how the thing works. Ritchie raised an eyebrow. Do you? Montgomery allowed himself the smallest of smiles. No. But I understand its implications. He drew a slow line across the map, tracing the route they expected Rommel to take. Gentlemen, he said, for the first time, we know where the desert fox is before he knows where we are. The room fell silent, except for the faint rustle of papers and the distant grind of a typewriter. Every officer present knew what this meant. For 2 years, the Afrika Korps had struck with uncanny precision, appearing where the British least expected, vanishing when cornered, attacking with the timing of a predator born from sandstorms and shadows. Now the predator was exposed. Montgomery straightened. Signal all forward batteries. Ready the armoured brigades. Tonight we prepare. Tomorrow. His eyes hardened. Tomorrow we strike first. Back in the desert, Rommel's advance was quiet, save for the hum of engines and the soft creak of vehicle suspensions rolling over cracked earth. The moon, rising thin and silver, gave the dunes an otherworldly glow. Rommel climbed down into the half-track, rubbing at his temples. Schmidt, he said, bring me the map of the British positions. Schmidt unfurled it across the small table, anchoring the corners with compasses and spare rounds. Rommel studied it with the intensity of a man decoding a secret. If I were the British, he murmured, and I suspected an attack here. He pointed to a cluster of ridges. I would place artillery north of this rise, enough elevation to see our approach. Schmidt nodded. But they don't know. They can't. They shouldn't, Rommel agreed. But assumption is the enemy of victory. He marked another point, then another. We adjust the approach slightly eastward. If the British have any early warning, we'll hit their flank instead of their teeth. Schmidt saluted and moved to relay the orders. Rommel leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the desert wind brush against his face. He hated the feeling that somewhere, someone, was watching him. The British had never been omniscient, only lucky, or occasionally clever. But tonight, something whispered otherwise. He opened his eyes and looked again toward the dark, endless expanse ahead. He wasn't afraid, but he was wary. The difference between the two was the margin on which battles, and sometimes entire campaigns, turned. At the radar station, Sinclair returned after a short rest, the night cool enough that the sand no longer burned through his boots. He pushed open the door to the operations hut and felt at once the familiar warmth of machinery and the muted urgency of men working faster than their voices admitted. Madsen met him near the console. "Sir," he whispered, handing over a fresh sheet. Movements accelerated. And there's more. Possibly reinforcements from the southwest. Sinclair scanned the sheet. They're committing everything. Yes, sir. Looks like they're expecting to surprise us at dawn. Sinclair allowed himself a tight smile. Then, dawn will be interesting. He turned to the watch engineer. Keep the sweeps steady. If there's any deviation in their path, I want to know. Tonight we help decide the fate of North Africa. Outside, the night deepened, and the distant rumble of tank engines echoed faintly, almost imperceptibly, through miles of open desert. The men couldn't hear it clearly yet, but the radar could. It saw movement the way the desert saw shapes in heat haze, sharply, accurately, and far before the human senses caught on. Sinclair stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the desert air. Stars glittered overhead, cold and bright, scattered across the sky like shrapnel. "Rommel," he murmured to himself, "where are you going tonight? And what will you say when you realize we've been watching you from 40 miles out?" But Sinclair knew the answer wouldn't come tonight. It would come tomorrow, amid the churn of sand, engines, and artillery, the moment when Rommel understood that the battlefield had changed beneath his feet. And that moment was approaching faster than either side fully knew. Dawn crept across the dunes with a slow, deliberate glow, illuminating long shadows behind the British defensive lines. Artillery crews stood at their posts, guns angled and ready. Tank crews sat in turrets, engines idling, waiting for the order they had rehearsed but never fully believed they would execute at such an advantageous moment. Montgomery surveyed the horizon with field glasses, the sunlight glinting off the lenses. He saw nothing yet, but he trusted the reports. At precisely 0600 hours, Sinclair's voice crackled over the field telephone, crisp and steady. Enemy columns approaching from bearing 195, armoured spearhead in front, range 12 miles. Montgomery lowered the receiver with an almost reverent slowness. 12 miles, he said. We've never seen them this early. No one responded. He turned to his command officers. Begin the assault plan. Fire when ready. The order rippled like lightning across the British lines. Moments later, the first thunderous barrage split the morning open. Rommel, riding at the forefront of his armoured advance, heard the first shells before he saw them. A distant whistle, rising fast, followed by an explosion of sand and fury a few hundred meters to his right. He snapped upright. Artillery! From the east! Another whistle. Another pounding detonation. Closer this time, the ground trembling under the half-track's wheels. Schmidt rushed to the cupola. Sir! How? They shouldn't have. But Rommel already knew. His mind raced faster than the shells. They were spotted. Somehow, impossibly, they were spotted before dawn, before contact, before reconnaissance could fail or succeed. A rare surge of frustration flickered across his face. He felt exposed like a hunter who steps into clearing only to discover the prey already waiting with rifles set. The next explosion sent a plume of fire rising behind their flank. Schmidt steadied himself. Orders, sir? Rommel clenched the railing, staring toward the distant British lines erupting with coordinated fire. He did not curse. He did not panic. But he felt something he had long dismissed as a British weakness, now rising inside him a sharp, unfamiliar bite of shock. Quietly, he uttered the only truth he could grasp in the moment. They knew, he said. They knew exactly where we were. Even as the shells came down, even as tanks behind him scrambled for defensive formation, even as dust clouds rose like storms of judgment, Rommel watched the horizon and understood that this battle was different. The British had seen him coming, and for the first time in the North African War, the desert fox was the one being hunted. The horizon writhed with smoke as Rommel's formations scrambled into new positions. Engines roared, treads tore at sand, and officers shouted over the deafening percussion of British guns. The desert floor shook beneath the bombardment shells, striking in staggered patterns, perfectly spaced, as if the British artillerymen could see the Afrika Korps with their naked eyes. Rommel dropped into the half-track as another explosion blasted a geyser of sand where his radio truck had been moments earlier. The shockwave hit him like a physical blow, rattling his teeth and filling the air with a rain of grit. "Get me communications!" he barked. Schmidt thrust a headset toward him, though the radio net crackled with static and overlapping voices. Units were reporting hits, repositioning, shouting for orders, some barely understandable through the chaos. "This was no accident," Rommel growled. "Their timing is too perfect." He raised himself halfway out of the hatch, staring toward the British lines. The rising sun cut across the smoke and flames, illuminating the battlefield in an unforgiving wash of orange. He could see the muzzle flashes along the distant ridges, coordinated, disciplined, firing not at random, but with uncanny certainty. Behind him, a column of Panzer EIs swung into defensive alignment, guns swiveling toward the unseen enemy. A young lieutenant sprinted to the half-track, saluting sharply despite the bombardment. "Herr General, our left flank is taking heavy fire too accurate to be from mere scouting reports." Rommel nodded grimly. "They're not guessing. They already knew where we were attacking." "How, sir?" the lieutenant asked. "Our approach was concealed, as always." Rommel didn't answer immediately. He felt the truth forming in the back of his mind, unwelcome but undeniable. Whatever the British were using, it saw farther than scouts, farther than aircraft, farther than the desert itself could hide. Something had stripped away the one advantage he had always relied on. "We adapt," Rommel said sharply. "Signal all units to pull back behind the dune line. We redistribute armor westward where the artillery is less concentrated. We must break their line from an unexpected angle." Schmidt hesitated. "Sir, with respect, it feels as though they already expect us." Rommel's jaw tightened. For a moment he allowed the flicker of frustration to surface, a rare crack in the facade of the Desert Fox. "Then we move faster than their expectations," he said. Across the battlefield, British tank regiments surged forward in controlled, measured momentum. Valentine tanks and Crusaders thundered over dune crests, their silhouettes emerging from morning haze like iron phantoms. Montgomery watched through his binoculars as the Afrika Korps shifted and reformed. Despite the shelling, Rommel's units maintained remarkable discipline, repositioning with almost eerie fluidity. Lesser commanders would have been paralyzed under such sudden counter-battery pressure, but Rommel's formations moved as if guided by instinct, precise, responsive, unbroken. "By God, the man is brilliant," Montgomery murmured. Ritchie stepped beside him. "He's brilliant, but today he's blind." Montgomery didn't smile, but his eyes reflected a quiet fire. "And we are not." A messenger sprinted up, saluting. "Sir, forward radar confirms enemy armor pivoting, northwest. Likely seeking defilade from artillery." Montgomery nodded. "Maintain pursuit, keep them guessing, and direct the medium batteries to shift fire 10 degrees west." "Yes, sir." As the messenger ran off, Ritchie turned to Montgomery. "Do you suppose Rommel knows yet?" "Oh, I imagine he's figuring it out right now," Montgomery said. "He's clever enough to know when the battlefield has changed." He paused, then added, with the weight of destiny settling in his voice, "And he's clever enough to know when the desert has turned against him." Rommel's western pivot brought temporary relief as artillery fire tapered. Smoke curled around his tanks like torn banners. Officers rushed between vehicles, shouting orders, rallying units, coordinating the retreat into a more defensible arc. The desert air stung with the metallic scent of burning oil. A Panzer III, hit squarely in its rear engine block, lay half buried in sand, blackened, silent. Crewmen dragged wounded comrades toward a makeshift triage behind a dune. Rommel stood amidst the commotion, taking in the state of his command. His scarf was streaked with soot, his uniform dust-caked, his expression taut but composed. Schmidt rode up beside him, helmet dented from flying debris. "Sir, we have preliminary casualty estimates." Rommel raised a hand. "First, tell me one thing." He pointed toward the distant ridges where the British guns still glinted in the sun. "Did any of our patrols report aircraft? Balloons? Ground observers? Anything that could explain how they pinpointed us so precisely?" Schmidt swallowed. "Nothing, sir. The desert was empty." Rommel nodded slowly. Empty. And yet the British had seen everything. He felt it then, an understanding, crystallizing with terrible clarity. They were watching him from farther away than he had imagined possible. They had found a way to peel back the darkness, the distance, the very fabric of desert concealment. Some signal, some device, some unseen eye. "They saw us before sunrise," Rommel murmured. "Before we were close enough for reconnaissance. They saw everything." Schmidt frowned. "How can that be?" Rommel looked toward the horizon, where the morning sun now blazed bright upon the battlefield. "That," he said quietly, "is what we must survive long enough to discover." The Desert Fox had been seen, but he had not yet been beaten. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.